So first, why don't you state your full name and address?
Okay, John, but I go by Jack Rucynski, 604 County Route 22, Paris, New York.
Now, how did you happen to join the Marine Corps?
Well, there was 4 of us in high school, and we all decided to go in on the buddy system. In fact, we're scattered to the winds today. One's in North Carolina, one's in Wisconsin, one's in Chicago, and I came back to Oswego.
Now, what year was that?
1962.
So, what was your thinking at the time?
To be very honest, just to get out of Oswego. You know, there was nothing really here then, and I just decided I wanted to do something different, and got my parents to sign for me because I was only 17, and off I went.
Now, and what prompted the Marine Corps?
Well, again, it was just, the 4 of us just talking back and forth, and we all just decided to do the same thing, and of course, the Marine Corps has always had a mystique about it, and rather than a lead outfit, and thought that's what I wanted to do.
Now, so tell us where did you first find yourself?
Well, of course, first place is Paris Island,
And what was that like?
Scary. I tell you that at 17 years old and having somebody constantly breathing down your neck was a very humbling experience.
Now, at 17, is that when you looked like this?
No, that's when I was with the New York State Police. I worked undercover.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. I never looked like that.
It seemed a little, for 62, that didn't seem like the hairdo.
No.
So, all right. So here we are. You're at Paris Island and at boot camp, or learning to become a Marine. Then what happens?
Well, then, after you graduate from boot camp, you go to Camp Geiger, which is in North Carolina, to advanced infantry training. Once that was completed, it happened to fall right during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and so things were moving pretty quick because they were trying to get us through quick, and nobody knew where anything was really going to go. So, but nothing happened to us, and from there I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, assigned to the 2nd Marine Division, and spent a couple of years there, and then I went to Okinawa.
And what were you doing in Okinawa?
Actually, Marine Corps, like everybody else, has problems in life. They sometimes have too many people in one place, and so I ended up as the commander's driver. And that's what I was doing. Vietnam was becoming a pretty hot and heavy word at the time, and we were really packing and unpacking and packing and unpacking for a few months. Everybody kept saying we were going to go to Vietnam. That finally happened in March of '65, and I found myself aboard an LSD headed to Da Nang.
So you arrive in Da Nang, and then what happens?
Well, it was sort of, if you'd seen the old Life magazines, it really was, we're on LSD, and of course in LSD the front end goes down. We did an assault in Da Nang, and then walked up and got in trucks and drove out to the end of the Da Nang airfield and set up our base camp. Originally, we were we were actually the first Marines there. I spent the next couple of months unloading ships. And it's, you know, when you go to war, everything isn't A, B, C, D. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of things. It's, you know, it's like going on vacation, and you get there and you forget something. And the Marine Corps, the Army, no one's any different. They forget things. And so we were struggling to get the kind of things, the equipment we needed, everything from tonnage to food. The enemy would constantly harass us with hit and run, constantly. Come in, drop some munitions on us, and then they'd be gone. And that happened for
Mortars or?
Mortars and rifle fire, you know, small arms fire. Most of the time, never saw them. You know, I think it was probably July or August before we actually saw a full-scale confrontation. The rest of it was mostly, again, mortars, small arms fire. You know, they'd shoot, we shoot. You know, not sure if you're hitting anybody. Don't care as long as the rounds are going out. So it was what we were trained to do. You know, and yeah, after a while, it just sort of fit in.
So your unit's job was protecting the airfield?
Correct. Yep. I was, like I said, right out at the end of the airfield, and in most of the time, they were actually after the airfield. Yeah. You know, they'd come in and hit a couple planes explode, you know, and then again they were gone. We were out, which was what we called Marble Mountain, and then on the other side was a mountain called the Hungry Eye. Don't ask me where I got the name, but that's what it was called. So, and we like I said, we were basically right there. I got in and out of Da Nang up to Chu Lai once in a while on a supply mission or something of that nature. But spent my time right at Da Nang.
Now you were saying the first major confrontation that you were involved with. What was, describe that for us?
Well, it's pretty much full-scale attack. I mean, everything was chaotic. I mean, there was
them on attacking the airfield, or
yeah, and they, we had helicopters up, and there's flares up, and there's rounds going off, and there's mortars, and that's probably God talking to me. I can still remember being next to a corporal by the name of George, and I just looked at him and said, he says, "I'm scared." And he looked at me and says, like I'm not, and when you looked at it, I was 19, he was probably all of 21 or 22, and and that was his first time in combat also. I think back about the kind of guys that trained us, though. We were fortunate in that time frame because we had the World War II and the Korean vets that were our trainers. And they had experience. I mean, the Marines in World War II and Korea, a remarkable legacy. And we were fortunate enough to have those guys as our mentors and our teachers. And so, it made things, I don't want to say easier, but more understanding.
Now, the attack, was that by the regulars or by the Viet Cong?
It was the Viet Cong, yeah. We were, we were very close to Da Nang, and Da Nang was infiltrated with, Viet Cong, and we had to go in there, and I can tell you that you just didn't know who was behind what rock, and so it just, needless to say, we're constantly on edge. You try never to let your guard down. Always, always being prepared for anything. So probably I would say for the next several months, hit and miss, hit and miss. Again, there was nothing ever like that again. They did hit an ammo dump once that I would tell you that you thought the world was coming to an end, because it, there was just explosions, and it just continued as one round went off, it hit another round, and so it became chaotic, and it was very near to us. So, in fact, I got some old pictures of me like a dummy sitting on some of the munitions and stuff, before they hit them. So.
Now, you were injured at one point.
Yeah, during one of these attacks, they hit a JP4 tank, which is jet fuel, and when a fuel explodes like that, what it looks for is oxygen. It looks for an oxygen trail. I just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and literally had a ball of fire go by me, and took off my eyebrows, took off part of my hair, lost the sight in my right eye, burns on my hands, but nothing. It didn't take the skin off or nothing. It just singed everything. And I was fortunate. We had good medical personnel, and they treated my eye almost immediately, and had some type of solution they put in it. And after a couple of weeks, vision came back. Everything was fine.
Wow.
Of course, during the monsoons, and I don't know if you know what your eyebrows are designed for, but they're to keep the keep the water out of your out of your eyes, and it was sort of tough because I didn't have any. So so what happened next? Well, I survived my tour in Vietnam, and I got on the Big Bird and came home on leave.
What year was this?
That was in early '66, and then I got stationed right back at Camp Lejeune again. I really loved the Corps. I really wanted to stay, but I was married. We had 2 kids by then. In fact, I had never seen my youngest daughter. I never saw her until she was 11 months old, and just decided there was time to move on. And I had been extended because of Vietnam, involuntarily, but so I ended up really with when you look at everything, I looked up almost 5 years in the Marine Corps. So I did my time. I probably, and I don't know if you ever heard this before, but we were the first. Again, we were the first Marines in Vietnam. So we were the first group that came back with the combat action ribbon and these kind of things. And I'll tell you, it was not the most pleasant thing at Camp Lejeune. Marines are warriors, and when they don't get their chance, they really look a little bit of disdain on other ones. So it really was a little uncomfortable. And so as things went on, I just decided it was time to get out and go and do something else. And I had made sergeant in '66, which there was such a big turnover in the Marine Corps then, and bringing so many people into the Marine Corps that if you spent 4 years and come out as a Lance Corporal, you were doing good. Now, here I was with just under 5, and I had made sergeant, but still, I just decided to get out.
So then what happened?
Well, I went to work at Alcan here in Oswego. I stayed with them about 4 years. Met a guy that was in the reserve unit here in Oswego, in the Army Reserve, and talked me into joining the Army Reserve. And I, even after I did it, I said, "What am I doing here in the Army Reserve?" I said, "This is really not me, because the Army Reserve back then, for lack of, it was a joke. You know, I mean, it really was. It was training stunk. You know, I mean, you just you went in, you did your time, you know, and got your check every 3 months at the time. Probably the only saving grace that we had is we had an old first sergeant by the name of Walt Brown, and Walt Brown was ahead of his time. You know, he tried to drill it into people that, you know, you've got to train, you got to be ready. But when you look at the late '60s and the early '70s, it wasn't clicking, and so I actually got out in '70, and I went with the New York State Police, and I spent almost 11 years with the New York State Police, but went back into the reserves, and there was a transition in the reserves where they were finally getting it through their head that, you know, you could get called up. Unlike today, I mean, I'll tell you right now, reservists today, it's not it's when you're going to get called up.
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Heck, this Oswego unit here has been called up 3 times, and so I became serious about the reserves and the kind of things that were happening in the reserves, and so again, my career in the state police was, I mean, just absolutely going great. You know, I mean, I was doing well. I made investigator. I worked narcotics, as you saw that photograph, and then I got hurt. I literally got the crap beat out of me, and I ended up getting a spinal injury, and pretty much was told by.
I'll give you a call. Look back, Patty. Okay. Thank you.
But pretty much told that I wasn't going to work again. Well, that's not the way I'm cut. So through exercises and doing what the doctor said, I got back into physical condition. And I'm sitting again. I'm still in the reserves. The state police had just sort of given me a walking papers. They have what they call a superintendent's retirement, and what that really is it says we don't want you no more. So they put me out on the street. Had a chance to go back on active duty, and that was in 1981. So I'm back on active duty. Ended up in my first assignment was in Pennsylvania at a reserve unit that was a little behind the step. They still didn't get the idea it was serious. But it just shows you that there's certain things that can turn a unit around, and I'm not saying me, I'm saying that if you've got the right people, you're surrounded by the right people, and the full-time people that were there, they understand what I always say is 3 basic things: training, leadership, and caring. And if you train them hard, you train them to standards, you lead them from the front, and you care about them, you can turn a unit around. Well, we were lucky. We managed to turn the unit around, and then all of a sudden, I got orders to report to Fort McPherson, Georgia, in a new branch called the Integrational Organization Branch. Now, what that is to finally take the Army Reserve, the National Guard, and the Army, and integrate them into a cohesive unit, because they've always been 3 separate components. They each go on their own way. And so I was the first NCOIC, non-commissioned officer, in charge of the integration branch. And we started, and it's pretty complex when you start looking at what they call an MTO, which is your table of organization and equipment. And you got an active duty engineer unit here, and a reserve unit, and then you've got a guard unit, and they're all different. They don't have the same people, they have the same equipment. And so this whole thing is to integrate them and say, okay, if I've got an engineer company here, it's going to look the same in each of the components. And it was tough, because in those days also the money was, oh, we're not going to give you money to do that, we're not going to give you money to do that. So it started out as hand-me-downs. You know, the active Army would hand it down, the reserves hand it down to the Guard. So, but it started to work. And then I ended up, a position opened in the Force Comm Engineer's office as a sergeant major position. I interviewed for the job and I got it. And I was there like 6 months and got notified I was going to the Sergeant's Major's Academy. So I went to the academy. That was in '87. Went to the academy, graduated, came back to Forces Command, and as typical of the Army, documents changed. I didn't position anymore. So I ended up over at 2nd Army, which was at Fort Gillem, as the professional development NCO for the for 2nd United States Army. You know, part of the thing asked if you ever had anything really humorous. Well, when I reported in, there was a master sergeant by the name of Jenny Mae Buck. I had never served women before. I mean, it was just, you know, my career was always, you know, male-dominated type thing. Well, Jenny was the acting sergeant major. Well, now I move in, she's no longer the acting sergeant major, I am the sergeant major. And we butted heads. And finally just one day to her, and because she always wore her hair all curled up. I says, Sergeant Buck, you know what your problem is? She says, what's that, Sergeant Major? And I says, you wrap your hair too tight. And she started laughing and I started laughing, and we became friends. You know, and it was just a matter of you know, breaking the ice. And so when she graduated from the Sergeant's Major Academy, because I had helped her, she was taking what they call the Correspondence Studies course. So I went out to her graduation, and I'm not really a touchy-feely guy, you know, and she ran across and hugged me and said, thank you so very much. And I'm going, oh boy, you know, hope nobody sees this. And so, but I'm there at 2nd Army, and I get a phone call and said I had been promoted to Command Sergeant Major, and here I go again. So I was headed to Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. And I went up as the Command Sergeant Major of the Readiness Training Center, which is trains both Army Reserve and National Guard soldiers in most of the administrative things that that they do, like in the units, you know, like the Oswego unit and stuff. And then I also I taught extensively all over the country. We had a course called the Command Sergeant Major's course, and so I went out and I taught that. So I was there about 3 years, and a new commander came in, and I say this with all honesty and sincerity. In 35 years of wearing a uniform, I only ever had one commander I disliked, and he was it, because he didn't know anything about soldiers or soldiering. He was a numbers cruncher, and so we butted heads. And I finally just said one day, I said, sir, I says, I'm out of here. I says, I'm putting in for transfer. He says, you ain't leaving here. He says, we'll find out if that Sergeant Major network or the Colonel's network is stronger. Well, I left. And I went to Panama as far as the Command Sergeant Major of Task Force Badger. Nation building type thing. What we did is we coordinated reserve and guard units coming in to rebuild schools, hospitals, clinics, roads, and it was again, I worked for a National Guard colonel who was absolutely first class, because he said to me, he says, Sergeant Major, he says, I need you out on the road. I need you out there doing the kind of things to make sure that, you know, we get the work done, we get projects in, because you got a reserve unit in there for 2 weeks, and you got to get the best out of them in 2 weeks. And so it was great working for him, because he didn't hold you back. He let you go out and he let you do your job. Well, after that, I received my permanent orders, which was as the commandant of the the First Army Non-Commissioned Officer Academy at Fort Indian Gap, Pennsylvania. Again, that was a challenge, because, you know, when they call you the commandant, it's the only enlisted commander position in the Army but you've got no authority. The problem is that even though you do the budget, even though you do the hiring, you do the firing, you do the planning and everything else, when it comes to disciplinary action, you can't enforce the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You got to do it for somebody else, or send it to somebody else. So that became very frustrating. But again, every couple 3 weeks when you graduated a class and you saw those young troops marching across the stage, you knew that you were doing the right thing. So it was a very gratifying situation, and the Region 1 NCO Academy was co-located with us. That was the National Guard segment. They taught the primary courses, we taught some of the advanced courses, but again, it was one of those things that it was one uniform. And there was no guard, no reserve. There was one uniform. Our job was to train soldiers, and I think we did it very well. And of course I was only the commandant when I talk about the soldiers. The instructors I had working for me. I mean, just did a fantastic job. They were good at their job, and they just turned out. They turned out good soldiers. And so that's the kind of things that that make you proud. We were going through the first phase of what they call TRADOC evaluation. TRADOC is the Army's Training and Doctrine Command. These schools had never been evaluated before. My particular school had already been evaluated and failed miserably. And at the time, we were working for General Johnson, Lieutenant General Johnson, big man. I mean, this guy about 6'6". And he used to carry a stick around with him. He didn't need it, but he used to carry, and so he was very intimidating. And he just says, "Sorry, Major, you better pass that evaluation." He says, "Or I got to tell you right now," he says, "you'll be looking at the end of your career." And I'm going, "Give me a chance here, well, Well, anyways, I will tell you that the military is one of the easiest jobs in the world when it comes to doing what you're supposed to do, because everything's in writing. Everything you're supposed to do is in writing. And it's all you've got to do is take and follow what's there. So we took the evaluation checklist. There was 152 areas on it. And we took it, and you just take, and you take somebody whose area of responsibility, administration or training or logistics or whatever, and you say, here's what your job is. You go down this list, and I'll get you what you need to make sure. Well, we passed the evaluation, the first NCO Academy of our type to pass it, with 151 out of 152 goes. Again, individuals did this. They just needed training, leadership, and caring. And so, the guys in charge, they're the ones that get all the pats on the back, but these are the folks that did the work, and then they did a fantastic job. Well, after that, they decided to move the academy to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I said, well, I've been here 3 years, time to go do something else. And one thing I always had, the support I always had, is my wife and I have been married 50 years in October. She was just so much of a support. She's just as much a soldier as anybody else, because, she'd say, okay, let's move. That's time to go, let's go. And so we went back to Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, as the Post Sergeant Major. Post Sergeant Major, I guess the best way to describe it is sort of like a deputy mayor. You work for the colonel, and you constantly around the post for morale and. Is this thing still recorded when that happens?
Yeah, I'm checking.
It's activated, I'm pretty sure, so we gotta move.
Yeah, Patty.
Oh. Oh.
Okay.
Now I get you.
Give me another minute, and I'll send Sarah down to pick him up. Okay? I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's fine.
You were saying?
So, anyways, like I said, a post sergeant major's biggest job is morale of the post. To make any difference if it was soldiers or civilians. I mean, we had 1,300 civilians working there. So you know, your day mostly consisted of wandering through the warehouses and wandering through the business offices and glad handing and saying hi and how you doing and all that, you know, all that kind of good stuff. And so I was there about 3 years, and then I was selected as the 7th Command Sergeant Major of the United States Army Reserve at the Pentagon. So now there's a scary thought. Here's a kid that grew up on the west side of Oswego here, and all of a sudden you find yourself with your own office in the Pentagon. But it was so gratifying. I used to tell the troops that I was their union rep, and I traveled 250 days a year for 4 solid years. I mean, I was on more airplanes and helicopters and rental cars and motels and everything else. I actually hit all 50 states. I hit 34 countries, and I hit even 3 territories, you know, American Samoa, Saipan, Guam, Puerto Rico, you know, you know, most of them were gratifying trips, but I went to Bosnia 19 times. Again, I worked for a guy by the name of General Max Barretts, and an absolutely remarkable individual. And you have to understand generals. Sometimes they don't like to get their boots dirty. General Barretts would walk through a mud puddle to say hello to a soldier. And that's why he was just so enjoyable to work for. He again was a soldier, and I literally loved working for the guy. I'll tell you that when I was out on the road, someone would say, well, how often do you and General Barrett sit down and talk in his office? And I says, so I think I've been in his office maybe 3 times. Well, what good are you? And I says, it's simple. I says, we have what we call the Barrett's flop. What? And I says, in my office, I said, I can hear he used to wear little clicky things on his shoes, and I'd hear him coming down the hall, and he could never figure this out. As soon as he'd walk in the door, I'd be standing at attention. He said, what do you need, sir? And then the guy was, I mean, you got to understand, if you're the chief of the Army Reserve, you're a busy person. You know, you're dealing with politics, you're dealing with the military, you're dealing with the Army, dealing with the Guard, blah, blah, you know. But anyways, he used to just literally flop down in the chair, just exhausted. Well, what do you got for me, Sergeant Major? And so we would talk, and he used to do that a couple, 3 times a week. But I traveled with him extensively. He loved to get out and be on the ground with the soldiers, and so I tell you that one of the funny stories about him is that he'd come out of his office one day and he said to Colonel Ray, he says, I'm going to go over and see John. Colonel Ray says, what? You're going to go over and see who? He says, John. And Colonel Ray says, I'm sorry, sir, what do you mean? The Sergeant Major. Colonel Ray says, sir, his name's Jack. Colonel Barrett, or General Barrett walks in and he says, what the hell is your name? And I says, well, sir, I says, what do you mean? And he says, well, is it Jack or is it John? And I says, I've always went by Jack. And he says, well, how come you let me call you John? I said, sir, you're the general. Call me anything you want to. You know, because he normally called me Sergeant Major, you know. But when he left, I decided it was time to retire because the guy that came in behind him was just a miserable person. I didn't dislike him. It's just that he could never relax, you know. Everything was just so up with him, you know. In the same way I talk about General Barrett's walking across a mud puddle. This guy would never walk across the mud puddle, you know. And so we had a good relationship, but General Lewis and I didn't have such a great relationship. And so when it came time, my 4 years were up as the Sergeant Major, I just said, time to retire. And he tried to talk me into staying another year. Nah, time to go. I'm tired. You know, I'm captain 35 years of wearing a uniform one way or the other, and I said it's time to move on. So So I did, I retired, and my wife and I went to Wisconsin, and I spent 3 years working for the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs, running, I was the program manager for military funeral honors. Wisconsin was one of the first states to actually hire crews to do military funeral honors. They had 21 people working for me in 3 locations. And again, the right people, I got to interview all the people, I got to bring them aboard, we bought them uniforms, we bought them ribbons, and we did a professional military funeral honors. But the guy that hired me had left, went to work for the Wisconsin Senate, and things sort of became very bureaucratic. And my wife and I just said one day, we're going home. We're just going to retire. So anyways, we come back here 10 years ago, and since then I own a place out in Parrish, and I got a couple pieces of equipment, and I just have fun doing what I want to do.
Well, Jack, I